This is Behind the Mic. Local and worldwide interviews with athletes, entertainers, and you. A talk show that will engage, inform, and take you to the edge, maybe even over. Now, from the Big Z studios in suburban Chicago, here's the host of Behind the Mic, Gary Zahara.
My first guest of 2025 and his career spans 50 years. First as an actor in classics like Jaws 2, Dressed to Kill, All That Jazz, Christine, and Back to School. Since 1998, he's been an award-winning film and highly sought-after TV director. Keith Gordon joins me behind the mic next.
Team Keys and your financial services division manager, Whitley Brooks Edmondson, specializing in affordable insurance and investments. Call 248-403-0919 to book your appointment. Slugmaster, turning batters into hitters. Log on to slugmaster.com for a dealer near you.
He was the affable nerd Doug in Jaws 2, the nerdy chick magnet Jason Mellon in Back to School, but he's most recognized as the nerdy, tortured, vigilante shitter killer Arnie Cunningham and Christine. Please welcome behind the mic actor and director Keith Gordon. Hi, Keith. How are you, sir?
Happy to be here, my friend. And
how's everything?
You said I was your first guest of 2025.
Yeah, well, you obviously we're gonna get into it, but I'm a high school and college basketball official out here in Illinois, and in December I had 27 games in 30 days, and then as January came around, I got sick the first week, and then the fires started, and I had some interviews lined up, but some people were affected, like yourself and your family we'll get into, but I had to cancel some interviews, and it's just been torturous trying to get people going because I know what's going on in Los Angeles, and now with the mudslides, and you and I were talking to each other for about 3-4 months on email, and you said that the fire affected your mom like directly. You had a
my mother-in-law.
Your mother-in-law, right?
My wife's mom and stepdad live in the hills, and they were really close. I mean, everything's okay in the end. They're back home now, but they had to evacuate, and you could see the fire really. I mean, from where they were, it was just the next little canyon over. So they were very, very lucky, but they're both well into their 80s, and they had to leave their home for 8 days, 9 days, whatever it was. And it was dramatic, but not as dramatic as people who actually lost their homes. I had a couple of good friends who lost everything, and that's really hard to deal with, obviously. So I've just been trying to be here for people in the ways I can, but there's only so much you can do. But it's been a mess, and now there's the mudslides again. Where we are, my wife and I live in the flat areas, and those are not anywhere near as vulnerable to fire or flood. Although we got about half a mile from where the evacuation warnings were. I mean, it was bad enough that it was going out like concentric circles. So we were like, it's funny, all the relatives brought all their stuff to our place, like to safe keep it, because everybody else was thinking. And then we were like, okay, what do we do with everybody else's stuff if now we're going to have to go? And we actually started packing up everything, and then it started to get better again. So
with all these fires going on the West Coast in Los Angeles now, when you moved to Los Angeles, did you keep that in mind when you were looking for houses? Be like, all right, let's stay away from the mudslide area, or let's go somewhere where there's more concrete than No.
I wish I could say I was that smart,
yeah.
But basically what happened, I moved out here forever ago now. I grew up in New York, but I came out here in the early 80s when I was actually around the time I was doing Christine. I got a place out here, and I just wanted a neighborhood that I could walk around in because I was a New York boy. So I was like, so much of LA was you had to drive everywhere. And so I kind of found this neighborhood called Westwood, which is sort of the town off of UCLA. And there's a lot more people in the streets, there's stores, there's movie theaters. And so I got an apartment, right near there. So I could just walk to pick up a sandwich or whatever. And then I just got to like the neighborhood. So then I kept moving to different places. And then when I finally bought a place, it was in the same area. But I can't say that I was so clever that it was like, oh yeah, I was avoiding all the bad stuff.
Well, it's good that your family and your mother-in-law is safe now and everything's going. Are you working on any new projects? Were you working on stuff before this happened? Are you doing anything now?
Everything I'm working on now is very long-term. I'm sort of, most of what I'm working on are independent films and independent, television projects that where so much of it is this ridiculously lengthy period of time where you're trying to piece together money, piece together casting. It's a very glacial process. It's so it sort of interrupted things, but it all moves so slowly anyway that it didn't have the kind of impact. If I had been shooting something, if I had been in the middle of something, it would have been a much more dire sort of effect. But really, I could do a lot of my work I do out of my little home office, and I can keep doing that other than wondering, like, do we have to get in the car and like head for San Diego?
Right. All right. Born in New York City, you grew up there a little bit. So we'll start from the beginning. You grew up in New York City. You were born there. Dad was an actor. Was it inevitable you were going to follow in his footsteps?
Well, it was funny when I was a kid. When I was a little kid, I wasn't that focused on it. When I was like 6, 7, 8, I was really I wanted I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a scientist. I was interested in all this. And then as I got older, I got more and more. I fell in love with movies. The movie that really, my dad took me to see 2001 on opening weekend in New York City because he thought it was gonna be a rocket ship movie. He had no idea, like, oh, it's this like grown up, really intense film. And I was too young to understand it, but I was old enough to know that I didn't understand it and to be fascinated by it and to go, how did they do that? And so that kind of ignited a real curiosity in me, and that started me on a path to being a movie buff. And then in my teenage years, I was like running around with friends making bad Super 8 movies. Super 8 is what we had before there was video.
That's right.
It was
That's
they
right.
were little. So they never got finished, and we'd edit them with pieces of Scotch tape, and I kind of fell in love with movie making, and I also, was acting in school plays and things, but I don't know how seriously I thought I'd ever be able to do it as a career. My parents were both actually in the theater. My mom quit when I was born, but my parents have both been like part of Compass, which became Second City. Second City is like really known now as this comedy, but they were part of it. What grew into Second City was called Compass, and it was Mike Nichols and Elaine May and Barbara Harris, and they were part of it. And so they both were around it, but they both, if anything, were trying to talk me out of going into that world because they knew how hard it was. Uh, they were like, "Yeah, this is not not an easy way to make a living." So it was sort of me going out on my own, just to like, okay, well, I know it's going to make you guys crazy, but I'm doing it anyway. And the acting thing was fluky. I was in a high school play, and there was somebody who saw the play who was part of trying to cast a professional play, and they were having real trouble casting one of the lead parts, and they thought I might be right for it. So I went and auditioned, and I got the gig, and it was sort of like, okay, this is amazing. And so I did that, and that led to me getting an agent, and there's this momentum happened by itself, which was insanely lucky. And what's funny was I was more excited by the idea of being a filmmaker than being an actor, but like, okay, acting was cool. And I started working a lot, which again, I don't think I even realized. I mean, I knew I was lucky, but it was, looking back, it's like, yeah, the dice came up so well. And I got to work as an actor with a lot of really wonderful directors. I got to work with Brian De Palma twice on 2 different films, and John Carpenter and Joan Nicholson Silver doing a play, and Bob Fosse, and I kind of would follow them around and ask questions and say, listen, I want to do what you do. Can I bother you? Can I come to the editing room? Can I see the dailies? Can I ask you questions? And generally, they were incredibly patient and kind and generous with their time, and treated me really nicely, and let me, kind of use it as film school.
You let me right
Which
into the answer of a question I was going to ask you down the line, but I still have some more to add to that when you talk about the directors that you worked at. But this is the question I ask everybody coming onto my show, whether you get in the theater or not. Growing up, you didn't have any interest in playing any sports?
Not seriously. No, I was never that athletic. I mean, I played sports like everybody did. I mean, I love basketball, and I would
Right.
play with friends, and we played baseball, but I was never part of organized team sports. I wasn't that great, and it wasn't my strength. And so, I was busy being a theater nerd and, a science nerd and, but yeah, I was small. I was like, I wasn't super coordinated. So I loved it. I mean, and through my adulthood, I've played sports with friends, but I never was good enough to be part of real organized sports.
What was it about James Earl Jones's performance of Mice and Men that really sold you on wanting to get into acting?
Wow. Well, my dad was there was a Broadway revival of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck's novel, just turned into a play. And James Earl Jones played Lenny. And, it was just, I had never been exposed to the power, in the same way that 2001 turned me on to movies. I'd never been exposed to the power of theater, of that kind of art. I was young. I don't remember what years it was, but I was 10, 11, 12, I don't know. And, if I'd ever been to shows, it was kind of more kid-friendly stuff. And here was this really, really heartbreaking tragedy. And I went back and like I ended up just weeping like every time I'd see the play. I mean, I must have seen it 15 times. And it was just astounding to me that it could break my heart open again and again and again. And that to me seemed akin to magic. So that was one of those moments. And I think we all have in our lives moments where things just change us. It's somebody we fall in love with, or a book we read, or there's just things. And that was one of those things that made me go, oh, I see why people spend their lives telling stories, and how important this can be, and how powerful. And James Earl Jones was just, a spectacular actor, particularly in theater. I mean, he's wonderful in movies, but for, so many people never got to see him on stage, but he was this very big guy, and he had this huge presence and this amazing voice. So in a Broadway theater, he was so effortless, whereas everybody else was worried about projecting, and he just, in theater, in film, sometimes he can seem a little big, and he often would play big characters, the Darth Vader voice,
Mhm.
but on stage, that very size translated to just an easy naturalness, because he could project to the back of the theater without trying at all. And he was very, very kind to me. I mean, he would laugh at the fact that I was there over and over and over again, and I would again ask him questions and, talk to him, and he was very nice to me. I mean, most people, having spent a lifetime in film and theater and TV, and most people are actually very nice. There's the reputations are deserved for a few people of being kind of cranky and mean or awful, but most people I've come across have been pretty good-hearted.
The start of your career was absolutely impressive. 4 blockbuster movies in 5 years, Jaws 2, All That Jazz, Dressed to Kill, and Christine. Not bad for a skinny kid from New York City, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, so much of it was luck of the draw. So much of it was, as so many things in life. I mean, I did 2 films with De Palma. One was called Home Movies, which is a little independent film that Brian made, and that led to me doing Dress to Kill. And Home Movies, they were sort of doing it under the radar, because Brian was teaching a course in filmmaking at Sarah Lawrence College, and he decided the way to really teach a bunch of young students the way to make a film is to make a film. So basically, he was going to make this film with them, and he was going to direct it, but it was really going to, they were going to be the whole crew. But to keep the publicity down and keep it, they didn't say he was going to direct it. They just said that it was his class, but they made it sound like the kids were going to direct it. So my agents called me and they said, "Do you want to audition for this thing?" Brian De Palma's kind of overseeing it, but it's a bunch of students directing. I'm like, I don't really want to do a student film. And as it happened, they were literally auditioning on my block. At that point, I had my first apartment in New York on 72nd Street, and they were on 72nd Street doing the auditions. So when my agents told me that, I was like, all right, I'll go over there. Went over, read for them, and then I got this call that night saying, "Hi, it's Brian De Palma. I'd love you to come down to my place, audition." I was like, oh my God, okay. I came down, met him, and he explained, "No, I'm actually directing the movie." And I was like, oh my God, okay. And it was an amazing thing, because so close, if they had been on, 35th Street, I wouldn't have gone in, wouldn't have gotten that job, wouldn't have done Dress to Kill. Who knows what else would have been different in my life. So like so many things, it's how the fates, let things fall.
It's sometimes the luck of the draw for you, correct?
A
Yeah.
lot. I think in all of our lives, it's true. The people we meet and don't meet, the choices we make and don't make. You can try to create your own luck, but to a certain extent, it's kind of beyond any of us, I think.
Jaws was my favorite movie. It scared the shit out of me. Number one, obviously the big scene that scared me and sent me screaming up the aisle at the movie theater was when the head came out of the boat in the original, and I hid in the bathroom for 15 minutes, and Dad had to drag me back in. I don't know if Mom and Dad wanted to torture me with that movie, but I think maybe till 8 or 9 years old, I slept in the middle of the bed because I thought maybe the shark would get me from underneath the bed. So, and then Jaws 2 comes around, and how does a 16-year-old Keith Gordon become part of the highest grossing movie in 1978?
Again, it was sort of as luck would have it. They were auditioning for kids. I had done that play that I mentioned when I was and I just gotten an agent, and they said they were auditioning for a bunch of kids in the movie, and they didn't really have much of a script. And at that point, the director was a guy named John Hancock, who did not direct the film that was finally made, but he was going to direct it. His wife had written a script, which was somewhat like the final script, but it was also rewritten a good deal. And so I went and auditioned for them, and they had me improvise, and I pretended to be scared of the shark, and it all felt vaguely silly. And I think I met them in like an office somewhere, and but I got the gig, and it was amazing, and it was just lucky. I just fit in with what they wanted in terms of this bunch of kids they were putting together. And we went through this sailing training and all this stuff, and then about I don't know, about 6 weeks maybe into shooting, God knows, I don't remember all the exact lengths of time, but they fired John, and they shut down the movie, and they brought in a new writer and rewrote the script, and then
The
brought
great
in
Carl Gottlieb came in and rewrote it.
yes,
Yes. Yeah.
Carl Gottlieb, who had written the first,
Yes.
came in and did a rewrite on the script, and they kept certain things like the water skier had been part of the script that existed, but a lot of the details were quite different by the time it was, and so they rewrote the script and then brought a new director in, Schwark, who just died recently, just passed. Very nice guy, and kind of started the whole thing from scratch. So by the time we started shooting any of the footage that was used in the movie, I'd already been on the movie like 4 months, 5 months. I mean, it was kind of crazy. And they kept us all in location while they were rewriting the script and everything, because they kept thinking they were going to get going faster than they did. So I was away from home essentially for about almost 11 months, which is crazy.
It was true. I did look that up. You spent 10 months filming there, correct? Basically.
Yeah, we were in Navarro Beach, Florida. I mean, we did go to Martha's Vineyard for a very short period of time, but mostly we were in the Florida Panhandle, maybe about 50 miles from Pensacola. I mean, at that point, Navarro Beach was a Holiday Inn. There was not really a town. There was just the hotel we were in,
Mhm.
and then there was a liquor store, and then there was it was like basically nothing there. So a lot of people went crazy. It's like I don't think Roy Scheider was having the best time, but I was 16 years old. I was on my own for the first time. I was getting paid. I was in Florida. I was working on a movie, and I didn't have a big part really. But the great thing was when I wasn't working, I could go hang out in the editing room that they had set up in the hotel, and I watched all the dailies, and I'd go to the set a lot when I wasn't working, and I'd watch what they were doing. So for somebody, again, who was a film nerd, wanted to learn about directing, it was a great gig. For somebody who wasn't like that, it would probably make your brain melt. And I think a lot of people were like, how long is this going to go on? But I was young enough and interested enough that felt really grateful for it. And the other thing was, even though I was getting paid minimum, I had no expenses. I didn't have, so I managed to save up enough money that when I came back, I was able to move out, get my own place, and have a little grub stake to start my own career with.
You remember your speech on the boat?
Oh, geez, something to the effect of Mr. Christian.
Yeah, Mr. Preston pumped up this boat. Shave off that muscle.
Shave off that dreadful mustache.
Yeah, shave off that dreadful mustache.
Yes, yes. And it was actually a lot of fun. I mean, they let us write stuff and improvise stuff. There was like the little scene with me and Tom Dunlop where I was like we were checking out some girl, and I was like, she wants you, and he's like, nah, she doesn't want me. I wear glasses, and I was like, yeah, you're right, she doesn't, and that was something he and I came up with. I mean, because the shark kept sinking, and basically
The
the
shark is
technical
sunk.
stuff
The
kept
shark is sunk.
failing. And so they kind of had to shoot stuff. So they actually gave us a little bit of leeway to just do these little scenes, and they'd film them, and some of them made it into the movies while they were busy trying to get the shark to work again.
Keith, as a young actor, them allowing you to improvise and write your own stuff, was that something that gave you confidence and be like, okay, it shook off the nerves and just made you concentrate and do a
Well,
good
it was
job?
just fun.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it was just, and as somebody who was interested in filmmaking, it was really particularly a blast because it was like being able to get involved with the process more. There was that shot of me reading in the boat when getting hit by the water balloon, and that was kind of like my shot. That was something I said. Well, they were saying, well, we need a shot of you for this montage. And I was like, well, what if I had a book and we put the camera here and it was like my first like almost like a directing thing, and it was so I was so happy. I was just that was also exciting. I mean, I still got bored at night sometimes, but because everybody else was a little older than me, so everybody else was having affairs, and they were, and I was like the kid brother, so I was like not really part of any of that. So I was a little bit, but it was, it was an amazing adventure. And it's funny. I think a bunch of us are going to have a reunion pretty soon. Janot's passing became an excuse to like say, hey, maybe we should get a bunch of us together. So I'm going to see a lot of the actors from it, most of them I haven't seen since. So I'm kind of looking forward to that.
It'd be nice to do a sit down Q&A there. I would love to do that if you want to come to Chicago. Being on the water with the mechanical shark, were you also cognizant of real sharks as well?
Well, it was trippy. We were in the Gulf of Mexico, and the first time we did a scene in the water, um, I was in the water, and there was, I was, at some distance from the barge the camera was on, kind of a lot out by myself, treading water, about maybe 50 feet, 100 feet away, and I hear somebody say, oh my God, there's a real one. And I look up and there's a thing going through the water, a fin, and it's like, holy crap, I'm in deep trouble. As it turned out, it was a ray, and it was one fin of a ray on its side. That was very interesting later, but at the moment, it was completely terrifying. Um, I don't think any of us ever. One of the actors said they saw a real shark. I don't know if I buy it or not that they did. I don't know that we ever really saw them, but they're again, you don't see them very often. They're not. That doesn't mean they're not around, but they're not always obvious. The thing we actually ran into a lot, which is not fun, and I was lucky, but a lot of people got stuck. Jellyfish. Um, we were shooting later than anyone had planned because they fired John, so the whole shooting schedule got pushed back. And so there's a jellyfish season, and we ended up shooting right into the jellyfish season. We also were right into hurricane season, so hurricanes came through and knocked down sets, and it was like so it was kind of a mess. Uh, but but yeah, a bunch of people got stung by jellyfish, and that was not fun. And I never did, but they were definitely, you could see them. They were all over the place, and it made for some tricky shooting.
What stands out to you in your film debut with the cast of Jaws 2?
Well, I mean, the big thing for me was the experience of it. It was not really anything in the movie. It was just being there. I mean, it's funny when I think about it, I don't necessarily remember. I mean, I do remember, but I don't think first about the scenes I was in or the things I did as an actor. It was actually being on that camera boat, watching and sort of asking questions and going, well, why are you using that lens? And why are you doing, that's the thing that I remember. And I also remember, the friendships I made. There were people that I did get really close to, and the ways we'd kind of keep ourselves amused and like laughing at stuff. And, we were a bunch of kids in the middle of nowhere. I also remember the Conquistador Room, the little restaurant in the Navarro Beach Holiday Inn, which was the only restaurant available to us, which had a very small menu, and how hysterically we all got so sick of the 5 things on the Conquistador Room menu because how many times can you have the same grilled cheese sandwich and or the one steak or it was what I remember was the experience, and that's I mean, yeah, I remember shooting it, but it was a sort of it was more of the amazing things that we were one morning waking up and opening the door, and there was like butterflies everywhere. We were in the middle of a monarch migration, and the entire Holiday Inn, there were like hundreds of thousands of butterflies everywhere you look. And I was like, oh my God, okay, I walked into like this world's greatest nature movie. So it was really those things that stand out as much as the movie itself.
All That Jazz is next, and then you get you get to work directly now with Roy Scheider. You really didn't work with him too much, and have any lines with him in Jaws 2. Now you do All That Jazz. Talk about working with Roy in the movie, and also the legendary Bob Fosse.
Well, what's funny is I still didn't get to work with Roy very much because I actually played the young Roy.
Right.
So we didn't really. We had one moment at the end of the movie where at the end of the film there's this big concert scene where he's kind of saying goodbye to life, and he comes up into the stands and shakes hands with everybody who's been in his life, and include and so I was there for that, but we didn't get to hang out a lot. I mean, he was always very nice to me. I mean, he was not happy to be on Jaws 2. I don't think that was a secret for anybody. He didn't, Robert Shaw's character was dead, and Richard Dreyfuss's was a big enough actor at that moment that he said he didn't have to sign up to do the sequel. But when Roy initially agreed to do the film, he agreed that he would do a sequel if there was one, and I don't think he was really counting on it. So, but he was very nice to me, and he was very nice to me on All That Jazz. When we were around each other. Fosse was already somebody that was a huge hero of mine, and so getting to work on that project, and it was an incredible script. I mean, it was the kind of thing you read and you went, "Oh, I just want." And it was funny because I went into audition, and the part was a young Roy Scheider, which is really the young Bob Fosse, and he's a dancer. And Fosse was like, "Well, can you dance?" And I'm like, I can barely walk on a good day. So, I mean, there's no reason I got that part except I think he and I just kind of hit it off, and he liked the acting part of my audition. And so the dancing, the dancing in the movie is mostly not me. A lot of it's doubled, but there were little bits and pieces, and that's why he was Bob Fosse. He could have me do this one little half of a move and make it look like I had some idea of what I was doing. I had no clue. But that's the remarkable thing about a genius choreographer and filmmaker is they can create illusions. And among the illusions he created was that I could dance. But getting to be part of that movie was just remarkable. And I got to hang out, really the people I hung out a lot with when we were doing that big end sequence, because I was there for like 3 weeks, like every day, even though I didn't have any lines and I was only in it briefly, but I needed to be there for it. So it was people like John Lithgow and all these amazing like New York actors, and we would hang out in the green room together. But mostly I would be on the set just watching. I didn't. Fosse was somebody that I didn't ask him a lot of questions because he was sort of definitely one of those super focused people that you just kind of felt like, yeah, he doesn't want me like going up there and chatting. But I would just stand and like listen and listen to him talk to a cinematographer and watch how they would work things out. And so it was I had the best film school in the world. Basically, I got to watch all these amazing directors do their stuff.
And the being on the water in Jaws 2 and having a lot of sailing, obviously you had to learn how to sail. So my next question was, did you have to learn how to dance? And the question was it either to learn how to sail or learn how to dance?
Well, like I said, I didn't really learn how to dance.
Right.
That was just me faking it. I mean, that was Bob Fosse saying, move this foot from here to here and getting a shot of it and then cutting it in. And it looks like, oh, yeah, that looks like I actually know what I'm doing. The sailing we had to actually do. And in fact, it was very funny because it was very Hollywood in that we'd go out in these little light sailboats and, we'd sail up and down for hours and it was fun to learn. But then we'd start shooting scenes and they'd say, okay, everybody stay, keep your boats right where they are. And it's like, dude, it doesn't work that way. When you're in a little tiny light boat and there's a big wind blowing out on the water, you can't just keep the boat right where it is. I mean, it moves. And they would get very mad at us and we would try to explain it's not that we're not good, it's that that's not how boats work. And they kind of figured it out over time, but it would drive them crazy that we'd be sitting there and then they'd get us all where they'd want us. And then they'd take 15 minutes setting everything up. And by the time they were ready, we were all somewhere else. But it's like, well, that's the water and the wind. But it was fun. It was fun getting to learn to sail. I did enjoy it. There's something very meditative about just I was out there alone a lot. Not the greatest boat. It was like an inflatable little dinghy, so it would you know like I was very slow and it would get swamped with water very easily. But it was a blast.
The hits keep on coming with Dress to Kill, with another phenomenal cast you had, Angie Dickinson, Michael Caine, and one of my favorite actors who I didn't know was in this movie. I'm a big NYPD Blue fan. Dennis Franz was in this movie, so I'm going to have to watch Dress to Kill. Listen, these were movies coming out when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, so mom and dad wouldn't let me watch those kind of movies.
They were right. This is
Yeah,
not an 8-year-old's movie.
yeah. Well, I mean, now I'm 54, so I think I should watch it. In fact, I should have watched them before I had you on, but we will. There's plenty of time. A kind of a darker plot from your first two films. Talk about your experience with Brian De Palma.
Well, like I say, I had worked with Brian on this little film home movie, so we knew each other. And I had played the lead in that, and so we'd gotten, and we really enjoyed working together. He was really nice to me. And that film, because it was kind of made with a bunch of film students, again, perfect for me because I was sort of like one of the students. I was like, he was hiring me as an actor, but I was like, okay, but can I kind of be like your class? Can I be part of them? And he was very nice about that. So we had a really positive experience. And then he called me and he said, listen, I'm having trouble casting this part. He had originally written the role as much younger. He'd written the role as like 9, 10 years old and was not finding anybody that could make it work. And so he said, so I'm now thinking of maybe rethinking it and making him a little older. And I was like already 17, 18. And he said, maybe making him like 16 years old. Could you come over to my apartment? He had an apartment that was like a office basically he used. And could we just work through some of this? So it was very interesting. I mean, of course, I wanted to get the gig. I wanted to work with him again and on a bigger project. So I went over there and we read all the scenes in the script and we talked about it and talked about how we could make it work with somebody not quite so young. And what's funny is he didn't end up rewriting a lot of it. I mean, when you see it, there are jokes in there and things that play very differently because I was older. There's like a lot of sexual innuendo that the idea with a little kid was that the kid didn't understand it. So with me, we just went, oh yeah, when you tell your mother you're building your Peter, because I was building a computer and I gave it my name, the only difference was like, yeah, I knew what I was saying, as opposed to the idea of the 10-year-old was supposed to be cute and didn't know what he was saying. We just made it, yeah, he knows exactly what he's saying. And he's like, screwing around with his mom and kind of, and there was a lot of flirtation. Nancy Allen and I were in a bunch of scenes and there was a lot of flirtation. And clearly I was, still a kid, but I still she was this beautiful woman and I would be trying to be like kind of cool with her and she would be sort of sweet and a little playfully flirtatious back. So we just brought that stuff to it without really doing a lot of rewriting of the actual dialogue, which is an interesting thing you can do. Is sometimes you cast differently than the thought and you don't rewrite it, it gives you sort of nice colorations that you wouldn't have found.
Did he allow you to improvise a little bit like they did in
We didn't
Jaws
do
2?
much just because it was very well written and it was just, every director is different that way. It wasn't like, Brian was, he wouldn't freak out if you changed a few words, if you put it in your own words, but he wasn't somebody who would just, he wasn't like a Robert Altman type of like, just improvise the scene. He's a very controlled, he's very strong visual images of what he wants. And so it wasn't improvising. Yeah, you could, if the script said, hi, good morning, and you came in and said, hey, how are you? He wasn't going to go, hey, it doesn't say that. But you were going to start going off on monologues about your childhood. But he was pretty relaxed. And the thing he did a lot that I really did like, and I try to bring into my own work later when I started directing, was he would do a lot of takes and he would get variations of things out of the actors. He really enjoyed what actors would bring. People think of him as a very technical director, but he likes actors. He likes actors' creativity. So, you do a take and you say, okay, give me one where you're angrier. Give me one where it's a little sillier. Give me one that's a little bit more heartbroken. Give me one. And so you get to try all these different things with it. And then he would decide later in editing what served him best. But it was, for an actor, it was really fun because you got to play. You didn't have to do it the same way over and over and over again. You got to try things. And that was something as an actor I loved. And I thought, oh, if I ever get to direct, I want to do that because it lets the actor feel very much a part of the process. And it was amazing. I got to again hang out with Michael Caine, and I was like, whatever, 18 years old, and I was like, Michael Caine, geez. And he was super nice. Caine was one of those really, really kind, sweet people, really funny, always telling like dirty stories. Just great. I mean, just a great guy, and often would hang around even when he wasn't needed. A lot of stars, like the second they're not needed, they're off to their trailer, and you don't see them again until you kind of sit on the set and talk, and you could ask questions, and he'd tell stories about different movies he did, and so it was amazing. And Nancy and I she was in home movies too, so she and I knew each other, and so it was very comfortable, and it was sort of old home week in a way. And it was a really, really, again, and I went a lot when I wasn't shooting, and it was a fascinating thing for a wannabe filmmaker. There's a sequence when you see the film, there's a murder scene on an elevator, which is very famous, like this incredibly horrifying murder. And I was there when they were shooting it, and I thought it looked so stupid. I was like, it didn't look scary. It looked fake. I was like, this is terrible. This is not going to be scary. What is wrong? And then, of course, when I saw what happened with the editing, and when they took the best 2 seconds of this and the best 2 seconds of, you realize, I mean, that was such a visceral lesson in the power of what editing does. Because when you're on a movie set, the blood looks fake, and you see the thing that they're doing to make the white knife do what it does, and so that was a big lesson in, oh, okay, a lot of the movies made in the editing room, not on the set.
Keith Gordon is my guest on Behind the Mic, actor, director, most known for the next role we're going to talk about, Arnie Cunningham, on the horror picture Christine, directed by John Carpenter, or how he was affectionately known and called by his nemesis Buddy Ripperton, Arnie Cunningham. Interesting vernacular there by Buddy Ripperton, but he paid the price in that movie. Keith, thanks for hanging out with me so far. I hope you're having fun.
Great.
We're talking about a lot of stuff. People probably interested they obviously wanted to hear about Christine, but well, I didn't know if they knew your entire career, since we talked off camera how you don't have social media, and I said that you'd probably be popular, but since you've got the podcast, and I think you talked about maybe having a Jaws 2 reunion, where you can have a Q&A session. I think that would be pretty cool. Did you, working for and watching Brian De Palma, did that experience prepare you for the role and to work in my opinion, the horror master himself, John Carpenter?
Well, everything you do as an actor or filmmaker, whatever, everything teaches you things that you take to the next thing. So obviously, yeah, working with somebody like Brian and learning about film and how film worked made it a lot easier to try to take on a big part for John Carpenter. It was still exciting and scary, and John was again another hero. I mean, I work with so many heroes, De Palma and Fosse and Carpenter. I mean, these are guys that I was growing up on their movies, so it was pretty mind spinning for me to get to be in their movies. And John was really fun to work for. I mean, of all the directors I work with, he what he really brought to it. I mean, the atmosphere he had on his set was great. I mean, that was something I really wanted to imitate if I ever got to direct, because there was this real feeling of everybody being in it together, which I loved. I mean, it was just fun to go to work every day. And so it was when I got the part and I was just starting to work on it, it was frightening. It was like, oh my God, I got the lead in the movie and it's John Carpenter. And then once we started working, it was just working. It was just fun. And it was a great adventure. I mean, I've stayed, Alexandra and I have stayed friendly. I mean, it was just good people. And it was a great role. I mean, to get to, it was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And you don't get those very often. So there was a lot of, we've had some rehearsal time where John and I talked a lot about how the character might change and what we would do with how he looked, how he sounded, what he wore. We tried a bunch of different things. We tested out different kinds of costume things. And, I did a lot of just homework on little stuff like, I mean, just, Arnie's voice, young, nerdy Arnie's voice tended to be up here, and then cool Arnie's voice tended to be down there. And
Yeah,
I just,
right.
and just finding all those little, what changed in the way he walked, what changed in the way. And what's weird is often we would be shooting, 3 different scenes in a day, and I'd have to go from nerdy to crazy to the cool guy in the middle, and and it was a little schizophrenic, and also it meant a lot of changing makeup and changing, but it was great. It was like sort of actor paradise.
Relatively young cast with you, yourself, John Stockwell, and Alexandra Paul, but also you were working with the talented Harry Dean Stanton,
Oh,
who was coming off
yeah.
obviously 11 years later, I think, from Godfather 2, or 9 years later from Godfather 2, one of my favorite movies, Godfather, all-time favorite movies. The car and its powers were the focus of this movie, but how did you prepare to turn your character dark while having a loving relationship with an inanimate object?
Well, I mean, the changes, like I said, John and I just spent a lot of time talking about different ways like we could approach it. And one of the things he said that I thought was great was he always said it was important to keep a sense of humor about the whole thing, like a little bit of our tongues in cheek. Like he said, it's a killer car. If we get too serious and too completely naturalistic, it's gonna then we'll look silly. Whereas if we can let go, hey, we're telling a story, and that's in the acting and stuff. So he was always like, it's okay to be a little big. It's okay to be a little. You don't worry about trying to be supernatural, as opposed to supernatural. I mean, supernatural,
Right.
which is also a great. Which is, for a young actor was that was a lot of freedom in that and being told that. And the car, what he and I talked about was that the idea that it was a very sexual relationship. It wasn't a theoretic love thing. It was like when I touched her, it was a turn on. It was like touching your first serious girlfriend. And so that he just didn't want it to be like this kind of cute little, oh, I'm in love. Like it's like no, it's like it's physical. And so that kind of colored everything that we did, was
Yeah,
that there was a
hence the
little.
music they put in at the time when you had those scenes with the car. When you would touch her, it would play some love songs or something like that.
Oh
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Or there was that scene where it's like, okay, show me,
yeah,
and
sure.
it was like basically it was like,
Show
okay,
me.
take your clothes off is what's is
Yeah.
what is what that scene's about.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was really fun because getting to do that with an inanimate object was really kind of a trippy. Again, for an actor, that's a blast.
It was still a badass, creepy movie, and let me tell you something: the picture with you possessed in the car was completely badass, man. Badass. That just probably one of the greatest promo pictures I've ever seen in movie
Well, the
history.
woman who did, and I'm going to blank on her name, which I feel really bad about, but the woman who did the photos on that movie was remarkable. She did a bunch of John's movies, and she was a great photographer.
You know the
Like
one
a
I'm
lot,
talking about, right? With the green face with the
yeah.
lights. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Just
it's a great photo. I
yeah.
mean, and she got stills that were, a lot of people who do stills for movies are fine, but like she's had a couple of books come out of her stuff that, I mean, she does really artistic, amazing photos, and that was one of them. But you'd look at her stuff, and it was like, oh man, it looked like she was, it looked like they had relit the whole set just for her photos. But she just would find a way to sneak in and get those pictures, and they were great.
You certainly shed the nerd look quick with that picture. You did not look like a nerd in that
Well,
picture at
by the
all.
end of it,
Yeah.
I went from super nerd to non-nerd, and I mean,
Not a lot of actors, Keith, get to work with award-winning directors. You started by working with four in a row. Is this something that further solidified you wanting to become a director?
well, the thing is, like I had sort of been interested in being a director before I ever started acting, so it wasn't like it didn't sort of change what I wanted to do. It just enabled me. I mean, getting to work with all those amazing people and other people. I mean, there were people I worked with in theater who were great. Um, Alan Metter, who directed Back to School, wasn't, no, he's not a famous director, but he, he was wonderful in his way. I got to work with a lot of people who I learned from, but part of it was that I knew I wanted to do it. So I would follow them around and ask them questions and be annoying. And they were all very patient with my being, an inquisitive, little mind.
But right out of the gate, your career, we're talking about 4 directors and 4 killer movies that you were in. It's hard for me to think. I don't know if you know anybody who started out their career like that as well.
I
Usually,
never
usually you have a couple stinkers and like movies that nobody really wants to watch. But I mean, Jaws
I
2.
had my share.
Well, I mean, we're talking about
I
four and
just, but
5 years.
basically,
That's pretty impressive,
but not the features. Yeah, I mean,
right?
I was in a couple of not very good TV movies. I mean, when when you're trying to make a living as an actor, you
Right.
do stuff where you go, yeah, that's okay if nobody ever sees that again. But no, I was extremely lucky, and a lot of that is just luck. A lot of that is just, you know, right place, right moment, right time, happening to be what somebody wanted, who was a wonderful filmmaker. And so I was very lucky. I also was, I also was a little bit cocky in the way that you are when you're 16, 17, 18, 19. So I would turn things down if I didn't like them a lot, because I always could go to a play. And I mean, I wasn't just doing the movies, I was doing theater, I was doing some TV, so I didn't take every job. If I didn't think something was good, I would do something different. And I was working enough, which is rare for an actor, to have some choices. So I was very lucky that way, because I would read some scripts and go, yeah, I just don't like this. And I would say no. And, if luckily I didn't know what I know now about how hard it is to make a living. So,
I'm going to read a quote here. Maybe you've heard this from John Carpenter. Also, I think Kevin Bacon was supposed to be in your role. He turned that down for Footloose, so I think that worked out good for him and you.
yeah. And it's funny because Kevin
Yeah,
and I were in a play together,
yeah.
and that was, you cross paths with people like all sorts of ways.
Here's the quote from John Carpenter. I love my cast in that movie. Keith Gordon was fabulous, and Alexandra Paul was. I believe she's been a model, just a terrific actress. And he goes, but it was a fun movie to make and easy, nothing tough about it, and it did okay. So I mean, John Carpenter throwing some praise on a young Keith Gordon there. So
Well, he and I got along really well, and we hung out after the film was done, and we did the commentary track for the movie together, on when they put it on Blu-ray. So we had a good time. He was very playful, which I just loved. I mean, he would tease me. He would do stuff like, I mean, he'd be off camera making faces at me. He just kept it very light and very fun, which was, with a young cast, was really important. I mean, we all came in like, oh my God, we're doing this movie with John Carpenter, and he made sure very fast that we were like, yeah, we're all doing this movie, and we're telling a story, and we're having a good time. So he'd do stuff like he'd hide the microphone, like the windscreen on the microphone, and watch the sound guy go crazy trying to find it. There were elaborate practical jokes. I mean, where Alexandra has a twin sister, and one day she brought her twin sister to the set, and they dressed her up and put her in costume and sent her in Alexandra's place, and saw how long it would take John to figure out something was wrong. I mean, it was a very playful movie to make, and that was wonderful. I mean, that kept it, and I think that was part of what let us as young actors relax enough to do well.
two movies after that, Billie Jean, The Legend of Billie Jean, and Static. The latter you wrote and had your father in a part. Was it the only time you worked with Dad at that time?
Well, my dad, just to be in Static, he was just a voice on a radio. He wasn't
Right.
actually in the movie. So that when we were doing post production on the movie, I co-produced the movie and I co-wrote it with the director, a brilliant filmmaker named Mark Romanek, and we wrote it together. And because he'd actually been the second AD on Home Movies, the movie I did with De Palma before Dressed to Kill. Again, it's all people you keep ending up coming back to and working with again and again. So after that movie, Mark and I had become friends, and he said, "Listen, I'd love to find something to do with you. I want to make a first feature. Love to work with you as an actor." So we wrote this script over a long period of time, and then spent forever getting financing for it. Very slow process. But we finally got to make it, and then we were in post production, and we needed voices on the radio, and actually both my mom and my dad. Are on radios, or in one case on a police radio, in the movie. But that was just something we hadn't planned. That it was, we needed somebody to be these voices, and they both had done a lot of voiceover work in television and radio and stuff, so we just had them in it. So yeah, I didn't get to ever act with my dad really. He directed me in a play, and that was really interesting. That was a kind of cool experience when I was very young. I was like 17. Never really got to work with my mom professionally at all, but my dad did. We did have that experience where he directed me.
All right, so you went from the nerd and then the vigilante, and then you died with your car lover, and then you came back 2 years later. My dad was, along with myself, we're huge Rodney Dangerfield fans, and still have both of his comedy albums. And the movie Back to School was just absolutely stinking hilarious. The one-liners were classic with Rodney. Talk about sharing the screen with a comedy legend like him.
Well, what was funny was that, Rodney was not an actor. I mean, he was not comfortable acting. He was so comfortable on stage, and acting was like was weird territory for him. So he was always like trying to feel his way out, and it didn't. And he did great. But that's when I was mentioning Alan Metter, who directed the film, and I think Alan deserves a lot of credit because Rodney really didn't want to do the scenes in that movie that where he's a little more human. Like he was very comfortable with the really wacky stuff. But what part of what makes that movie so good is he also has a few of those moments where he actually is like touching. He's kind of a human being, and I think that balances all the wild humor. And Rodney was really scared to go there. He thought it was going to like ruin his image, and he couldn't be seen as being vulnerable. And he couldn't. And Alan had to really seduce Rodney into it's okay not to be funny for 30 seconds. It's really all right, and that was tricky because Rodney was vulnerable. He was a vulnerable guy. So I feel like Rodney was great in that movie, but I feel like Alan, was very unsung in terms of what he did in terms of getting a real full performance out of Rodney. The other person on that movie who I think deserves a lot of credit was the great Harold Ramis, who did a rewrite on the script, and a lot of those one-liners were Harold. And Harold was that rare kind of super writer who could write in somebody's voice. So he could write one-liners that sounded like Rodney one-liners and that Rodney was really comfortable doing. And very few people could do that. And so a lot of those jokes were Rodney's, but a lot of those jokes were Harold writing in Rodney's voice. And
Remember, Keith, if you want to look thin, hang out with fat people.
yeah.
I mean, and
And
you talk about Harold Ramis right in that movie, obviously Ghostbusters, and he's passed on, and we're just losing a lot of legends here. But you look at the ensemble cast that fit like a glove: Robert Downey Jr., Ned Beatty, Burt Young, Sally Kellerman, and then just coming off of Karate Kid, William Zabka with the blonde flowing hair and torturing Jason Mellon as the towel boy.
And of course, like a lot of guys who played like asshole villains all the time, he was the nicest guy. I mean, Zapka sort of basically got typecast as the like horrible schmuck, guy who tortured all the nice people. And, sweetest, easiest going guy. Just, couldn't be more fun to work with, couldn't be easier going. But yeah, it was a great cast. I mean, Beatty was amazing. Downey was like, the guy was, he was doing Saturday Night Live at the same time we were shooting the movie. So he would have to come flying in, run to the set. We'd have him for like 3 hours, and then he'd turn around and fly back to New York to go back to Saturday Night Live. And he would just come in and just, it's Downey. He's amazing. And he would just nail it, and then he'd be gone again. Burt Young, I loved. We got along great. Really fascinating. Burt played and was a street guy. I mean, he was that guy to an extent, but he also was very sensitive. He wrote poetry. He wrote plays. He was a lot smarter than the guys he played. He came from the streets, but he also was, had a Shakespeare side. And so I loved him. We hung out a lot.
Man, I'd be remiss without having to talk about the comic that was ready to go into the atmosphere at that time, Sam Kinison, the late, great Sam Kinison as well. Was Professor Turgison in his role. I remember your line, you're like, Dad, who do you got? Professor Turgison. You're like, oh, good luck with that. So, I mean, that scene right there, I think is just something that, will stand the test of time, It's
And I don't know that anybody, I guess they knew. I mean, but that scene was so much, it was funny on paper, but what Sam did was so damn brilliant. And So he went so far. He just like all those shackles went off, and he went as he would do as a comic. But he, like when you read it, it was funny. When he did it, it was insane and brilliant.
And I
And
don't think it would work if he was just a regular professor. I think he needed to be the crazy
oh
ass
yeah,
Sam Kinison. Yeah, absolutely.
oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean that made that scene. I mean, it was one of the. I actually think Rodney was intimidated by him. I mean, it was like one of the few people. Rodney was like not intimidated by a lot in terms
But
of other
Rodney gave him
people.
his start too. So
Yeah,
he brought him into the comedy
but when
store. So
they shot that scene, I definitely had the feeling that Rodney was like, "Holy, that was amazing." It was
yeah.
like
I mean, you had to be laughing your ass off in between takes because I was looking for the DVD with blooper reels. I can't find it. Do you have a copy of that? Is there one existing
I
for the
don't
deleted
I
scenes or
don't
blooper reel?
remember if they ever put out bloopers. I mean, yeah, you're right. They probably should have if they didn't. I mean, it's been years since I've watched like it's so funny. You work on these movies, but you don't always look at the bloopers or whatever because you were there, so it doesn't mean the same thing. But it would be if it doesn't exist. You're right. It should.
Well, when the cameras were off, was Sam and Rodney, riffing off each other? Were they telling jokes and just making everybody laugh?
Sometimes, although Rodney was an interesting character. Rodney was a lot more serious a lot of the time than you'd think from his persona. Rodney's humor, his whole like I don't get no respect, and I mean that came out of a lot of stuff in his life. He was like that kind of classic, laughing on the outside, crying on the inside clown a little bit. He'd had a hard life and a lot of years before he succeeded. So he wasn't always on and funny. He was kind of often could be quiet. He could often be kind of sad seeming. So, there definitely, I mean, he could be really funny and he could riff and he could do like, 10 minutes jokes in a row, but he wasn't always like that. I mean, people assume that, oh, it's Rodney and he was always being Rodney, but the Rodney that we all saw as a performer was sort of a character. It was somebody that he played. That wasn't necessarily him if you just went and sat and talked to him. So it was interesting because he was there definitely was a sadness to the guy along with all the humor.
2 years later in '88, you jumped into directing and have been doing it ever since. Was it a case of you being tired of being cast as the nerd, or was directing you saw as your calling? Even
Yeah,
when
no,
you
like
talked
I
about
said,
earlier.
directing was something I always had wanted to do, and I was, well before that, I was writing scripts and trying to, I didn't know how to get there, but it was what I really wanted. And then doing that film Static that you mentioned, was one step of that. I was a producer, I co-wrote the script. I mean, that was where I was sort of trying to get to go. I just, again, luck was with me in that I made that little film Static. Um, a producer named Jonathan Crane saw it, really liked it, and said, "What else do you have?" And I was like, "Well," I said, "Well, I want to direct like everybody, but there's this book that I think would be a terrific little independent movie called The Chocolate War. It's sold like 1 million copies. It's taught in schools, so there's like a built-in audience. I think I could make it very inexpensively, and so I feel like that would be a great film to make because even if I screw it up, you'll still make your money back. Basically, there's going to be, at that point, VHS was just becoming a thing, and there were like 10,000, video stores around America, and VHS is wholesaled for like 99 bucks a piece. So if you sold a reasonable number of VHS tapes, you could pay for a movie. And Jonathan owned a video company as well as a production company, and I was like, look, they teach this thing in school. If everybody who read the book, rents the movie, or you can't lose. And basically, he said, okay. He said, you can go make the movie if you make it cheap. And so I got to do it. It was remarkably easy considering that every other movie I ever made took forever. That one, he basically said, yeah, if you can make it for $500,000, I'll give you $500,000. And so we went and made it.
Being on both sides of the camera for the better part of 50 years now, in your opinion, what has changed?
You mean in the business as overall?
Yeah.
Um, well, the business goes through so many changes. I mean, it's changed over and over and over again. I mean, right now it's in a strange place. Among the biggest things was television going from being something that was seen as not very good and not taken very seriously to becoming in many ways more interesting than features. I mean, TV, you know, it was really around the time of The Sopranos and all that, where people realized, whoa, this can be a really amazing medium. And you had a lot of the best writers, actors, directors suddenly working in television. Before that, there had been a real split. People who were worked in movies didn't want to work in TV. TV was seen as like slumming it. And now TV is really where a lot of the most interesting stuff is done. But it's constantly changing. Like right now, we're in a very odd, difficult period where there's a lot of consolidation in the business, a lot of companies eating other companies, so a lot of less sources of financing, things like that. It's always changing. I remember, look, when VHS came out, they said that's the end of movies. It's like, you know, nobody's going to go to movie theaters anymore, and it's all over. And you know, and then instead it became an incredible boon for smaller films because VHS became a way you could finance your movies. So, you know, the one thing about the business over 50 years is that it's always changing, and everybody's predictions about what's happening are always wrong. At any given time, whenever everybody says it's going to be a great next 5 years, it's going to be a disaster. Whenever they say it's a disaster, it turns out great. I just try to keep my head above water and just go with the flow because the business side is going to do whatever is going to happen.
Final question in my segment here with Keith Gordon on Behind the Mic. Best advice for you, Keith, personally and professionally?
Ooh, wow. I mean, everybody who ever said to me some variation of listen to your heart was really good advice because in this business, there's a lot of things pushing you away from that. And I've never been sorry when I made choices that felt like what was important to me. And I have been sorry when I made choices that weren't that. So that was no one person. It was something I heard from a lot of people. And, you know, I've been lucky enough that there's not much I have regrets about. And I think that's partly because I was willing to, you know, prioritize what was important to me. You know, I didn't really care about being rich or famous or any of that stuff. I mean, it was like if any of that happened, fine, but I really wanted to enjoy what I was doing. And I tried to live that way the best as much as I could. And you know, I'm really glad for that.
It's unfortunate the younger generation doesn't understand that. They're just all about the dollars and the clicks and the likes and all that
Well, I don't know that that's
other
the younger
crap.
generation. That was every generation. I mean, that's Hollywood going back to the beginning. I mean, it's an industry fed on fame and on, you know, power and, you know, it's a glamour industry and a lot of people get into it because of all those things. So I don't know that that's a new issue. I think that's you can read about Hollywood in the 1920s or 1930s, and it's all the same stuff.
A big popularity contest.
Yeah, and you know, and a lot of pressure to succeed, and a lot of you know, you're up and you're down, and everybody loves you for 10 minutes, and then you have one failure, and then they're not interested in you anymore, and you know, careers rising and crashing, and people abusing each other. And I mean, it's always had a dark side, the industry, but then there've always been a bunch of people kind of just trying to do their work and do good work, and that's the part of it that I love. But the business side of the business is, you know, not the greatest. I mean, that part of it's kind of ugly. The creative side of it's wonderful.
Keith Gordon on Behind the Mic. I'm your host, Gary Zahara. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and follow us on Instagram at The One Behind the Mic and also Z-Force Media on YouTube. All right, Keith, final segment for you. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate the time. So much fun. It's called In a Word. Going to ask you some questions or give you some phrases. If you can answer it in a word, fine. If not, talk as long as you want. All right, you ready to go?
I'll give it a try.
All right, here. Question number one in a word for Keith Gordon. Growing up in New York City.
Adventure.
One for one. All right, this is a four-part question, but four different people, just if you can do it. Here we go.
Okay.
They're all directors, obviously. Je ne sois.
Trying to do one word. Unfazed.
Bob Fosse.
Genius.
Brian De Palma.
Master.
John Carpenter.
Oh, I get a lot of 3 words. 2 words. Let's see.
I think we got him. Right.
1 word. Alive.
Wow. Interesting answer. All right. Question number 3 in a word with Keith Gordon on Behind the Mic. Directing versus acting.
Directing.
Right. But so directing versus acting, what, yeah, in a word, like just
Yeah.
directing, give me directing in 1 word.
Present.
Acting.
Pretend.
It could be, you could probably say challenging too, right? Now, obviously acting, challenging, right? Depending on what role it is.
Well, yeah, but you could say that about everything.
Yeah, directing too, right?
About
Yeah, just
like directing or marriage or yeah.
this is kind of a softball for you. Number 4 on the in a word with Keith Gordon. Arnie Cunningham.
Brokenhearted.
Wow. Okay. You did have a hot girlfriend at that time, but you chose the car over the chick, which I think most guys would probably give you a thumbs up nowadays. Taking the car over the woman.
And then the car killed me. I mean, that's the thing. Is the end of the day.
That's right.
You know.
That's right. That's right. All right. Last question in a word with Keith Gordon. Your career.
Lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. You said it in the beginning. It was the luck of the day. Like I said, 4 out of 5 movies, incredible movies, award-winning movies with a great cast and great directors. I mean, shit, I would love to do that. Man, oh man.
I can't complain about anything because if I do, thunderbolts will come down from above, and
But I don't see that happening nowadays. Just the way that's why I asked you what was different in the industry. I just think back then, and it was kind of surprising that all the directors that you mentioned that you work with allowed you to, hang out and look in the editing room and whatnot. Now, like I dabble in a little background stuff here with the Chicago Med PD and Fire and whatnot, and they don't like you talking to people. It's just like off limits. It's it's bad juju, and I'm just like, I just wanted to stand by the tent and look in how the cameras are working and what they're doing.
TV is also a different thing though, because TV is moved. You move so fast in TV. The pressure is so high that it is a different thing. The guys that I was working with, their movies were their movies. Their set was their set. They didn't have people looking over their shoulder. So, like Brian De Palma could choose to be nice. Like on a TV set, there's so many people, so many bosses that I think it's harder to do that. So you might, if you were on the right set, you might find people who were very open to talking and letting you look at things and let you look through the camera. It's movies. That is where movies and TV are different because TV is moving about 4 times as fast.
Keith Gordon, so much fun talking to you. Thanks for coming on. I'm glad we were able to do this. I'm glad you're safe and your family's safe out there and everything's going well. Continued success, and hopefully, if you ever come to Chicago, look me up. And if you ever want to direct some stuff out here, if you need a Polish guy with a big nose and a deep voice, I'm your man. So
I love it. That would be a lot of fun.
There we go. I'm trying to sell myself. I don't know if that worked or not. So
it was great. It was great. I'm telling you, you got a great voice. I mean, hey, if I needed a radio announcer, yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thanks for your time. Continued success, and let's stay in touch.
All right, my friend. I would love it.
Team Keys and your financial services division manager, Whitley Brooks Edmondson, specializing in affordable insurance and investments. Call 248-403-0919 to book your appointment. Slugmaster, turning batters into hitters. Log on to slugmaster.com for a dealer near you.
Final thought, big thanks to Keith Gordon again for coming on. A great guy, a great interview. Like I said, we had this plan for at least a couple of months. The fires pushed it back, and my officiating schedule, like I said, December. A ridiculous month for high school and college basketball, 27 games in 30 days, and then my significant other poisoned me for a week in January. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the interview. We actually talked off camera for another 15, 20 minutes, which I probably should have had running, and we could have added to the interview. So much more stuff we talked about. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and follow us on the gram at the one behind the mic. Facebook also behind the mic, spelled M-I-C. I was going to go on a rant here. My father has been gone for 7 years. I filed a lawsuit for wrongful death and slip and fall, and it finally was settled, finally got the check. A lot less than it was supposed to be, thanks to COVID, and thanks to a lot of other factors. I'm not going to go on a rant here. I think I'm going to do a separate episode on that, on disloyalty and family and people who stab me on the back and all that other fun stuff. So I've warned people. Once I got back behind the microphone, all bets are off. So you know who I'm talking to. All you people who like to go behind the scenes and go on my pages and leave comments on TikTok and all those other social media aspects. But I'll definitely have a episode where I talk about family and what's going on with my father and what happened with my father and how it totally disconnected the entire family. But again, thanks for listening. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We'll have more interviews for you coming up. I'm working as hard as I can. Unfortunately, the fires in Los Angeles has pushed us back tremendously. There were some ones that we had lined up in early January that fell to the wayside. So we're working on getting those back. Gail Grady is one of them. Nick Turturro, like I said, is another one of them. So hopefully we can get those on in a couple months. Also working on some people from Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, and Chicago PD. So for all of us here at Behind the Mic, thanks for watching. Good night.
Behind the Mic has been brought to you by Team Keys and your financial services division manager, Whitley Brooks Edmondson, specializing in affordable insurance and investments. Team Keys, keep elevating yourself. Call 248-403-0919 to book your appointment. And Slugmaster, turning batters into hitters. Log on to slugmaster.com for a dealer near you. Behind the Mic is a Did He Go production, produced by Z-Force Media. Stage manager is Heather Marie. The executive producer of Behind the Mic is Eric Ferguson.